Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the For the Love of Creation webinar series, to the first of these 3 webinars that we will be doing this month. I want to just say a little bit about the webinars. Prior to the recording, we were blessed with a smudge and a prayer. Teresa did a smudge and Tony did a prayer, and we so appreciate being able to be part of that. We're going to do a few introductions now, and then we will also do another prayer. So this series is called The Road to COP27. As many of you have heard already, For the Love of Creation is co-sponsoring a delegation of people who will actually go in person to COP27, which is being held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, this November. So this United Nations conference is an important moment for people from around the world to gather to increase our ambition for climate justice and to work at solidarity and working together across national boundaries to tackle the problem of climate change and to work at justice across the nations. And so while the delegates are preparing to travel in person, preparing what they want to do there and how all that they need to do to get ready, we are preparing our hearts and minds and our networks to support them there, to support what they want to do there, and to support what they want to ask for there, and just to further the For the Love of Creation goals of making a meaningful contribution to climate justice. And so we've chosen this as our theme for the webinar series. And this particular session is called The Spirit and Justice. We've named each of the 3 sessions with the Spirit, and we hope that you will bring your spirit into this. We pray that the Great Spirit will be blessing the series and our hearts and minds as we work at this important network together. So next week will be Spirit and Change, as we focus more on what kinds of shifts we need to see. And then Spirit and Solidarity, as we think particularly about our solidarity in a global context on the 3rd week. So that's just a little bit of an overview of what we will be doing in the next 3 weeks. Today's time together is particularly a remembrance of the fact that October 4th is Sisters in Spirit Day, a day that is marked across the country in memory of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so we have our privilege to have some Indigenous women here to share with us, to talk with us. And I want to particularly introduce Teresa Snow, who will guide us through the rest of the evening and the storytelling and the sharing that is prepared for this day. So Teresa, I want to turn it back to you now for your sharing. Thank you.
I think we're going to do something with Sabrina and Ian. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony.
Hey, that's cool.
I missed a step. Sabrina, it's your turn.
I was going to go ahead and let you miss it because I'm all about going with whatever flow of the evening happens. It's all good, man. So good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina. I'm joining you from Toronto. And Whether you are joining us just for this evening's session or for all 3 sessions of this Road to COP27 series, at each session, we just want to take a moment to invite everyone to continue in this collective deep breath. For those of us that had the privilege of being part of the smudge, we've already taken a good deep breath, and we want to continue with that. And so we want to be very clear that this is an invitation with intention, and to pause and reflect on the sacred ties that we all have with creation. We want to pause in gratitude for our speakers and their sharing tonight. And we pause to ready ourselves for deep listening in this short time that we will have together. With that, I would like to turn it over to Ian, who has some very special words for us to think on.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Tony, for already bringing us into a sacred space. With this webinar for the 3 installations for these next today and the next 2 Tuesdays, we'd like to begin with prayer to recognize that among other things, climate action is a spiritual calling, because the earth and everything in it is sacred. We want to know the names that all things bear in the sacred depth of their being, names given them by Creator, not the names given by the forces of conquest or domination, entitlement or ownership, consumption and destruction. We seek justice, we seek spirit. And as creation groans in the depth of our souls, we know that things must change. We seek spirit, we seek change. More than ever, we know that we are a part of the same big global ecosystem. We are beautifully connected. It is part of our sacred reality. We seek spirit and we seek solidarity. In all we say and do, may we honor all life as sacred, and may our time together be like a prayer.
Thank you. And so we will be using this thread, offering it throughout all of the sessions, again, as an invitational collective deep breath. So just before we turn back our attention to the speakers, I would also like to add that we will be having a longer prayer circle gathering held virtually. The first is this coming Thursday, October 6th, with Reverend Tony Snow. So if you would like to continue in this spirit and just have some time dedicated in prayer with this guided prayer circle, I'll put the link in the chat and leave it to Reverend Snow to talk more about that later. And so with that, I'm going to mute myself, and I look forward to hearing from Teresa, Snow, Shannon, and our other presenters tonight.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina and Ian, for those words. It was really nice to hear everything being done and the work as we move forward, and that we move forward collectively with one mind, one body, one spirit. I prepared this presentation, this PowerPoint, to talk about honoring spaces for Indigenous women and girls. If there's questions that come up or comments along the way, feel free to ask in the chat box there. We'll leave some time at the end for questions and comments. Also within it, we have another speaker here who's joining us, Jamie Smallboy, who's Cree, and she's done a lot of different work within this area. So we'll be calling upon her to share her experiences and moving forward. And then we'll also do a video too, I believe, of Stardale Girls Group here in Calgary that just got a bunch of funding for some incredible work that they're doing. So the slide, can everybody see the slide? And so, well, I've muted everybody, so. Okay.
Yes, we can see
so
the slide.
honoring spaces for, thank you, for Indigenous women and girls. And it's a presentation for Sisters in Spirit 2022. And I work as a contractor. I'm a certified life skills coach, but also a certified trauma recovery counselor and traditional parenting facilitator and an addictions instructor. And I do workshops in beading and sewing as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So land, and I started to include this fairly recently, water acknowledgement. I was asked to do the land acknowledgement at a water conference in Canmore. And I thought, well, yeah, I can do a land acknowledgement, but if the conference is about water and we live near water, and that's what we call our area, Minihini, cold water, then we should be acknowledging the water as well too, because it's healing and it has various capacities that we talk about and that are very, very much in line with climate change. And so, so we did do that, the land and water acknowledgement, and then just a little bit on what is Sisters in Spirit and the historical impacts, and then so forth. So, getting in place with that, the role of Indigenous women. And so what is Sisters in Spirit? Oh, we'll go back. Yes, thank you. So it began as a campaign in 2004 by the Native Women's Association of Canada. And they did this because they wanted to bring light to and awareness to the high rates of harm, sexualized and racialized violence that was an abuse that was happening towards Indigenous women and girls across Canada. In 2005, they had a vigil. That was the first vigil that was started. And then they had received funding from the government to start doing work. And that was about 5 million that they received from the government that next year after they had done the campaign. And so now, every day, or not now, so for today was October 4th, and you'll see vigils happening, marches happening across the country, because it's October 4th, and this is what they're honoring, the Sisters in Spirit. They're honoring and taking time and space to create and honor time for those that are missing and murdered Indigenous women. And now it's even gone more and added to women and girls, but also gender diverse people. And so this is something that has come about in a long ways of historical impacts to Indigenous people with that can run parallel with the effects of colonization, assimilation, genocide, cultural genocide, and so forth. And then we'll go back to the other side there, Tony, the one before with the agenda. And so historical impacts, and how do we come to these historical impacts that put us into where we are today? If we look at our history, then we begin to understand how much our societies are fragmented today. So some of the historical impacts that happened to our people was our economy was impacted, our family systems were impacted by residential schools, by the PASS system, by various acts like the Indian Act. They used to have an act, Bill C-31, where if an Indigenous woman married out of her nation or her outside into a non-Indigenous person, she would lose her status as an Indian person. And then also too, we have the 60s scoop and present day child welfare system. And so these historical acts seed into presently things that happen with child and family. And so when we understand that we're impacted by these things and how we're impacted, then we begin to understand why there is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Another part of it is the role of women. Before settlers came and colonization arrived here on Turtle Island, what we call North America, or another name is Makochi, Mother Earth. Before that happened, women had a very integral role and still do within the family system, the community. They would be known as matriarchs, and they would have a place that was regarded and respected because they are life givers. And in giving life, they set forth that next generation of our people. And so when these things aren't asked, or they aren't asked about, and then you have another group comes in with a different perspective, a different belief system in the role of women, and then it's downplayed and segregated, and our women are, their role is lessened, it really impacts the community. And also too, within the women, because we're life givers, we carry that DNA or that blood memory. And so our membership, our people, it falls under the woman. So if I have daughters, then that's my legacy. Those daughters carry my DNA, they carry the blood memory. And so before, they would just automatically be a member of the band. But now with colonization, we have a membership code, we have things, applications we have to do, there's appeals, and all these things weren't like that back then. And so those are things that are act as barriers to our women, and that can very vastly impact identity and belonging. Because if a woman was under Bill C-31 and she lost all her rights, she could not go to a reserve, she could not get help. And then what do people do as a way to cope with trauma and violence and abuse? They may turn to addictions or substance use. And so when we begin to understand the way that history was played out, then we begin to understand the history of abuse and why people are in a lot of trauma or addictions and poverty right now within Indigenous communities. And so also with that, within the Indigenous role of women, when they're not being able to claim who they are under their mother's role or their mother's heritage, because it's taken away and put in a dominant, a matriarch role, or a patriarchal role, it lessens the people. So for instance, when we did our names, we were given names at a certain time. We might have many names, but also too within that, when the newcomers came and they start giving us English names, it fell under the man and under the man's name, under the man's family. Even within housing to this day, within communities, we don't own our houses on reserves. It belongs to the community, to the reserve, and it's held in trust with the crown, with the land. And also within that, the naming for the houses, it usually goes to the sons or to the male relatives within the family. And so this is something that's a very colonial and assimilative practice that our people go through, and it isn't really talked about, or general public don't know about these things that happen. And so there's many different ways in which our women have been impacted and by assimilation and colonization and made less than, and to be made, I would say, 5th, 6th class citizens of this country when we were the ones here in the beginning. And so there's a lot of different things that come about with looking at the roles of women. And so, and there's, because of this and the awareness now that people want to bring up because of Sisters in Spirit that started in 2014, you see all these types of movements that have happened. And so, for instance, there's the Families of Spirit. So Families of Sisters in Spirit started in 2011. And that was because of the funding cut to the program. And so they wanted it as a way to continue funding the program, funding the initiative, the campaign, and ways to help, because funds were being cut. And so different things have arrived from this. We also see in 2015 was the missing and murdered movement, and all types of different groups of, there were slogans of women having picture boards, and it would say, "Am I next?" And then the Me Too movement. And then just very recently within our own Indigenous country over the summer, we've seen a great outcry of women speaking up about Indigenous abusers within Powwow country, which is an area there too that is just within Powwow, you go sing and dance, but over that, there's a whole family of that. And so that has started to come forward. And also too, within all these things that have been done, campaigns and awareness, we want to look at too the people who helped do this, who helped coordinate this, and how they got involved with it. And so I've asked my sister here, Jamie Smallboy, to speak a bit about her her introduction into it and the work that she does. And also too, if you have any questions for Jamie, if you want to type it in there on the side, and then we can get to those after. So thank you.
I am good to go.
Yes.
Dante. Not to go with some Nestigaset, Massachusetts, Alberta, Watinia. I am from Massachusetts, Alberta, formerly known as Hobima. I reside here in what's called Vancouver, in the beautiful West Coast territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. It's beautiful here, and the sad thing about living here is you see first hand, well, you could see it all across Turtle Island, but I live in the downtown core area, and every day you see our people, you know, suffering and still enduring the pain of intergenerational trauma, and more visibly the women. And I will admit that, you know, at one point in my life, I was out there and I was lost and I was addicted, and it was a very dark road. And I met a lot of women out there that they had good hearts, but they were so broken down, like their spirits, their sense of self-worth. We all lost our identity as who we are, and our language we call, you know, we're Nehilsko. There were Cree women, and every one of them, you know, they're not all just from these host nations. They come from all across Turtle Island, from the States. But the one thing that I related to was losing who we were, like losing our self-identity and that connection to who we were born to be. And you know, it took years of healing to get to where I'm at now. And looking back, that disconnect came from when I was just a child in diapers. And that was because of residential school. So my life was already altered when my grandparents were still babies. My life was altered before I was even born. And so out here, you see that, well, again, you see that all across Turtle Island. But one thing that I noticed is this country was groomed how to treat us, like what Teresa was talking about, how, you know, the historical impacts are. This country was groomed to think of us as a lower citizen, as a, you know, the one of the less worth. And traditionally, our women were respected because, like as Teresa said, we're life givers. You know, that's a blessing of a miracle that only life givers were gifted with. And we lost that honor within ourselves. Well, I guess speaking for myself, lost that honor within myself, that dignity of who I was as an Indigenous woman and as a life giver, and all the blessings and gifts that came along with it. And I remember the first time that I ever heard of the Missing and Murdered March was in 2011. And I woke up and I was hungover, and I heard drumming. And like, we were a Powell family. We grew up dancing to the drum, like before we could even walk, you know? And so when I heard this drumming, I thought that, you know, oh my God, am I that hungover? Like, I thought I was hearing things. And I got up and I went following the drum beat. And I turned the corner and there was hundreds of women and people marching, and there was smudge, and then there was elders, then there was drummers and singers and so many people. And I stopped one of the marchers and asked what this was what this was for. And because I didn't know that our people were allowed to do things like that. You know, I was so oppressed, and you know, just so much. I was so oppressed, and had such, little sense of self-worth that I didn't think our people were allowed to do things like this. And she told me it was for our missing and murdered women. And that made me cry for a few reasons. One, because I personally escaped with my life twice. I could have been what they call a statistic. I could have been found in, downtown Vancouver. But, thanks to Yamanto, I wasn't. And also that when I first ended up out there were two women. One was Blackfoot from Kainai. I can't remember her real name, but her street name was Roberta. And this other one, her street name was Angel, and she said she was from Siksika. They took me under their wing. They took care of me, and I would see them every day. And then one day I just stopped seeing Roberta. And to this day, I don't know what happened to her. Her friends don't know what happened to her. Her brother doesn't know what happened to her. And the same thing with Angel. One day, like she was there every day, and then nothing. I still to this day don't know whatever happened to them. Again, being out there, watching all of these people drum and dance, and drum and sing and pray, that made me cry. And I started going to that march every year, but I felt like, yeah, okay, they come together, they come and they march on this day. But when the march is over, our women still get treated the same way. Cops will still tell them, shut up, do you want to go missing? They watch their boyfriends beat them. They watch their the ones that are in the sex trade industry, they watch their pimps beat them. After the march is over, everything goes back to the same way. And I personally, I thought like, well, what can I do to make a difference? Because it's sad to see everyone, thousands of people come together for that march. And as soon as that march is over, so is that support, so is that concern. The selfies are taken, the shirts are taken off, and then, our women are still stuck where they were. And so when I started my healing journey and I returned back to our circles and our lodges, I didn't have any ribbon skirts. Like I said, we're a Powell family, but after that part of my life being so dormant and so disconnected, I had nothing. And when I returned back to the circles and lodges, I was gifted skirts. And in my heart, I felt like I earned them. I got to a place in my life that they came and found me these skirts. And then when I was given the teachings in our ways, like the Cree ways, our beliefs of, making the skirt, everything that encompasses the making of the skirt, the creation of the skirt, I felt so honored. And I thought of the women here, and the women, all across Turtle Island that were like me, that don't have that connection, that aren't around their homelands, that don't have their family there, that are out there in this harsh, cruel world, and that are thought as of the lesser Canadian citizen. And I wanted to bring that back, so I started the Red Ribbon Skirt Project. And there was no funding here. Unfortunately, a lot of the Indigenous organizations within the Lower Mainland of Vancouver, there's politics involved. So as I went out looking for dollars to try get this Red Ribbon Skirt Project on the way, I faced a lot of ridicule. I faced a lot of rejection. I faced a lot of like, well, who are you? Who told you could do that? Like a lot of that. And it really hurt because all I was trying to do was to share some of that healing that I got, some of that, return some of that we lost. And I cried and I prayed and smudged. And one morning I woke up and it was like, I heard this, just so, whatever you have, just so. So I did. A little more as time went on, I got a little more material donated, a little more money, and I was able to give out 112 skirts to the families of our missing and murdered at that march that year. And when I thought of gifting these skirts, I thought of making them red, not really because that seems to be the color that everyone has attached to our missing and murdered, but because in our beliefs, red is the color that spirits recognize or are attracted to. And I thought my vision was a lot of these women that were murdered, they didn't get their goodbye song sung for them. They didn't get their smudging done for them. They didn't get their ceremonies done for them. Some of them still haven't even been found. So I thought if for one day, if we make these skirts red, their loved ones will see them. And they'll come and march with them for that one day, and they'll follow that medicine, and they'll get their smudge that they need. That was my vision. And so this year, it'll be the 4th year that we're doing it. Now, the great thing is, you know, coming across my sister, Teresa, and others like her, that ribbon skirt project has grown from just here in Vancouver to Edmonton to Calgary, and Teresa did one on her nation in Cochrane, and I believe they did one in Tsutsuna as well. So it's starting to grow. It's like, you know, this little home fire started, and the embers are being shared to, you know, across Turtle Island to different communities. So that's one of the things that I do to bring awareness. Is it's simple. I've had people ridicule me and be like, well, how is a red ribbon skirt going to solve anything? Well, it doesn't solve anything, but it reminds us of who we are as Indigenous women and as life givers. We need to find that connection and nurture it and continue to rebuild it. And the reason I do it is not just for those that have been lost or that are still lost or that have been discovered, but for the future generations, because I have a daughter, and every time she goes out, walks out of this house, I'm panicking until she comes home. I have a granddaughter that I worry about, because what is her life going to be like if we don't teach the people in this country how to treat us and how to respect us? Nobody will. This country has proven that to us. Nobody will teach us how to do that. We have to teach them that we deserve that respect and we deserve to be protected because we are life givers. There is no other race or gender, no other gender that can bring the miracle of life into this world from the spiritual realm to the human form but us. And that does deserve protection and respect. So that's one of the things. One of the other things that I'm working on is, when you call 911, they have that e-com where, they have a call center where it's fire, police, or ambulance. So I've been meeting with the VPD, the Vancouver Police Department here, and with our Sister Watch committee. And I will tell you, that's a tough fight. They're very structured and their colonial way of thinking. They don't know how to look outside the box. They only know how to think that their way is the only right way. So what I'm trying to get them to do are a couple of things. One of them is to include missing persons along with fire, ambulance, police, and also to have Indigenous representation in the call centers, because doing the work that that we do, there's just too many families that call 911 when their loved one has gone missing. And even though we're told it's a myth that you can report a person missing right away, that you don't have to wait, the call takers will tell you that you can't report them until 48 hours or 72 hours or 36 hours. They may say it's policy, but that's not what they practice. But if we had Indigenous representation there, we'd be able to monitor those calls that come in. We'd be able to assess better than them because they don't know our people. Like, for example, the Amber Alerts for children, they're not inclusive of Indigenous children that are living on the reserve. I'm not saying it's discriminatory, but I'm saying they're not inclusive. An Amber Alert, the criteria, they have to have a known abductor or a description of an abductor or a witness that's seen the abduction or the vehicle. Well, on a reserve, it's completely different because some neighbors are like miles away. And so there's a lot of predators that do go out there and they do look for children. They do look for women, but because somebody didn't witness it, which the chances of that happening if your next neighbor is like 5 miles away or, close to none, they need to adjust that. So I've started a petition. I'll put that in the chat to change, to try to get the Amber Alert criteria adjusted, and also to start an alert system across Turtle Island for our Indigenous women and girls. And along with that, to do like a billboard campaign that they have in the States, in some states that they, sorry, 1 second, my cat's eating my sponge. I apologize. So I spoke with Chief of AFN, Roseanne Archibald, and once I hit 20,000, I'm gonna submit the petition to her. And then she's gonna try bring it forward and try get it to, I guess, the Parliament level to see if we could implement that some way, because I think that it's, well, so many people feel that it's important that we have an alert, because when our women go missing, they're not taken seriously. They're not, they're brushed under the rug. Like, I'm sure everyone's aware of Chelsea Poorman, Noella Soup, Natasha, my cat, sorry, he's just eating my sponge. Their murders are still considered not suspicious. And the way that they were found, there's no way that that can be suspicious. Like, I've done so many different presentations that show the difference between the media reaction and response to non-Indigenous women going missing, and then the lack thereof for the Indigenous women going missing. And it's incredible, and it's really disheartening, and it's not right. Our women are hunted, and I really feel that, you know, if we all come together, like, you know, it's great you're going to the United Nations. I wish that we would have that voice for our women there as well, because it's not taken seriously provincially, and it's not taken seriously at the federal level either. Our women have been targeted since day one, since the settlers or the newcomers first arrived here. Our women have been targeted, and so this entire country, including the states, have been groomed to target our women, and it's time that we turn that around. I don't know if I have time, but I wrote a poem, Teresa, that I would like to share if there's time. If not, I totally understand.
Yeah, just finish off with the poem, and then that'll be good. So you're doing good.
So the poem I wrote for a rally here at Crowd Park, and it's called If I Were a White Girl. If I were a white girl, they would have found me by now. They would have had hundreds of people searching for me, not just my family and my friends. If I were a white girl, the police would have believed my mom. Something happened to me. I would reach her if I could, but I couldn't. It was a dead end. If I were a white girl, they would have started an investigation instead of saying I was out partying with friends or I didn't want to be found. Because I wasn't, and I did, but there was no help around. If I were a white girl, I wouldn't be lying here now, smelling my own decay, wondering, will the snow find me before my family does, as my killer walks away? If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have stabbed me repeatedly, splattering my Indian blood and knocking out my teeth. If I were a white girl, my flesh wouldn't have been torn as he was dragging me through the gravel into the trees. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have punched me in the face for fighting as he tried to choke out my last breath. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have bit me, spit on me, and beat me as he raped me before my death. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have been excited by my terror or my fear and my rejection of his sexual advances or his offer of cheap beer. If I were a white girl, I would have likely been his passenger and certainly not his prey. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have dared to think of killing me that day. But wait, if I were a white girl, he would have felt obligated to get me safely to where I needed to go. And if I were a white girl, I wouldn't have been hitchhiking in the first place. I'd have opportunity, privilege, and a home. If I were a white girl, I wouldn't have had a target on my back placed for me at birth. I wouldn't be missing and murdered and laying dead here on the earth. I'm an endangered species, yet not important enough to top your great white lists. Your Indian Act could not stop my bloodline. Your sterilization was cut short. Your society grooms those that kill me, and there's no justice for me in your court. You're killing me with your own hands, Canada. That is genocide. If I were a white girl in this country, I wouldn't have had to fight this hard to survive, only to die here today this way. I wrote that poem for a rally, and the following year, my childhood friend Marlis Johnson's daughter, Billy Johnson, went missing on Christmas Eve, and they found her April 22nd. And the way her disappearance was handled was just so disgusting. The cops didn't listen. It took them 14 days before they actually publicly put out a missing persons report on her. They ridiculed her mom. They wouldn't listen to anything that we were saying. And that just, it angered me to see, you know, Marlis would call me 3 or 4 in the morning, just heartbreaking, crying, wailing. And I felt so helpless. So that motivated me to try do better, to try do more. And since then, I've tried to support families that I'm able to with things like, you know, coordinating search parties, fundraising for search parties, fundraising so that we could get missing persons posts put out there, to hire people to put them out there, because, you know, the communities, they come together for Muniawak so easily. They come together for non-Indigenous people so easily, but for Indigenous women or Indigenous people in general, it's not the same. I'm really honored, you know, for giving me the space to share with you the things that I'm doing, and honored to hear the things that you're all doing and sharing with me as well. Hi.
Thank you, Snish. Jamie, thank you for sharing all of that, your truth and your story and the journey of others that you continue to help. And so thank you for all of that. We're going to go to a film right now, or the Stardale Girls Group, and then we'll finish up after. So any questions in the chat there?
There are a couple of questions. Do you want to take them now or after the film?
No, we'll do it after the film.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ayo na binadose. Ayo kukukumisin ipisuas. Pasipisuas. Ayo na tuita bixis pumukinan. Ayo kipitakis pumukinan. Nakatsapapua o kapinan sukapi kimapipitsin. Okay, nakamuksiagi ko eksin tapokane po ya. Nakumanistes pumusa makatsapapua o kanya sukapi. Okay, nakiskinima saya makasay sa bokato sa iskinima pia. Ayaw istibeta pia opis pumukinan. Ano tita opis pinan mokinstis. Ayaw na tuita bixis pumukinan. Nakumanis tayo kakimahpinan. Akay kimotiyos, akis pumotiyos. Ayaw istibeta pia opinekinakunsta po kamanistan oksistikois. Again.
The sun goes up, the sun goes down, and then it goes back up again. The wind blows through the tall grass, whispering secrets of an untold story. I wake up to birds chirping, family talking, beams of light shining in my eyes coming from the crevices of my teepee. I sit up and run my fingers through my hair to get some knots out. Then I slip on my moccasins and head out. I turned to see my grandma motioning with her hands for me to come forward.
Kuko na.
I obey and walk to her, stretching and yawning all the way. I sit next to her, staring off into the distance. I see a forest with a river coming out of it. I see children wrestling in the tall grass. I see women and girls picking berries. And I see boys and men bringing back the hunt. I close my eyes, taking in the sweet aroma of nature, listening to my grandma's stories, putting myself in her shoes as she tells me of her adventures when she was younger, even mentioning some of her past relationships too. Listening to her soft voice is like a lullaby. I didn't even notice I had fallen asleep. I had become my grandma in her adventures. It was all a dream. I'd slept all day. Later at night, I lay in the backyard, looking up at the stars. I look around. It is peaceful. All I can hear is the day sleeping and the night singing. And when I look up, I could see the stories written in the stars, and the night carries on, singing its beautiful tune.
My grandmother passed away in September. I still talk to her every day and night. I get sad, mad, and depressed. She died of cancer. She had 12 grandkids.
My grandma went to residential school, and when she told me stories, it made me mad because of the way they treated her and other people. The road was never clear when I started out. It was never clean. A bit foggy, so I couldn't really see. There were times where I wasn't even on the road. Too far gone, afraid I might never find it again.
The road for her was foggy. She didn't know where it was leading. She only had the hope that something great was awaiting her.
She has spent her time getting through the beginning with her family by her side, but now she has to go it alone.
She is afraid of what she has to do to clear the fog. But she knows one thing for sure. This road is new. No, it isn't the one she was on before. For this new road is adulthood.
A scared child trying to find her way. There are times where she laughed and times where she cried.
She broke so many times that she lost count. Lost so many times that she grew scared to make new friends. Never in one place long enough to cry in front of others.
The road back in my past was so straight and fine, but now my road has jagged edges and is slowly falling apart. Whenever something good happens, it will be over just like that. I tried so many times to let it slide. I tried to make my road all nice, like I'm screaming for a way out, trying to bust my way out. This road is long, and for every turn I take, I'm so close to hitting a wall, so close to falling off a cliff. But someone always steers me away, and whenever I turn to look at them, they're already gone. No one ever stays. I'm trapped in this big cement maze, but the road is coming apart. I try to keep looking up ahead, but the road keeps coming to an end. I try to keep my hopes up, but how can I, with all the things that keep happening on this road?
The social injustice I've been through as a Native or Indigenous individual has been rough. The social stereotypes against Natives is that we are bad influences, drug abusers, alcohol abusers, and so on. It is the stereotype that I do not want to become. Everyone has a negative thought against Native kids. I have been accustomed to it. People wouldn't want to be my friend because of how they saw me. I would start to hate my own race because of it. I still can't fight my own slight racism, even though I know we aren't like that. We should be proud of our people and speak up. I never had a Native role model to look up to, except for the romanticized Pocahontas. Being a Native girl is scary because if I went missing, no one will bother to look for me. I would be seen as a runaway delinquent, no coverage on the missing and murdered Indigenous woman, and that pains me. Every day I go outside and I'm scared that I will be abducted and no one will bother to look for me. No one will bat an eye. I was sexually assaulted in a train and no one bothered to help me when I looked at them for help. No one cared. I'm so angry.
My life is anything but amazing. People say otherwise, but I don't see what's amazing for being called burglar and getting told to F off just because you ask for help. I don't see anything amazing about being discriminated against and hated just because I'm a different skin color. All of a sudden, I become an enemy. Cops and other higher authorities killing minorities and the innocent. It doesn't do much for my confidence when I see a person of color getting smothered in a cop car or a gun pointed against their head, accused of a crime they didn't commit. I don't see anything amazing about being yelled at, "Get on the ground right now." I don't see anything amazing about worrying every day if I'll be another victim of sexual assault. Nothing amazing about being either missing or murdered and the stories not being heard because I'm not of the right ethnicity. My life is full of racism, discrimination, and cruelty because of my non-white nationality.
My biggest fear is being kidnapped, taken away from my mom.
When I was younger, I hated myself. I thought that I was broken, that no one could ever or would ever love me. It's the only way a child can grow up when their father abandons them. But he had to go. He was unfit. He made me feel like everything was my fault. But now I have people saying it's not my fault, over and over again. Okay, I know it's not my fault, but it's the only way I was taught to live. It's how he left me, making me feel like shit. But it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. But how am I supposed to believe that when everything I love leaves or dies? I'm a pestilence, a disease that wrecks everything it touches. Why couldn't he just stick around or be a good dad? Was that too much to expect? Wasn't I good enough for you?
Thousands of untold stories of the forgotten ones.
We're asking for answers for the silence of 1,000 heartbeats. We're asking for answers in the dark. Can you hear them crying? Can you hear them screaming? They are the voices of forgotten ones left in darkness and fear. Will the sun come up again and show us the light, show us the road?
Little bones in the silence of a beaded history.
History of abuse and power.
This is our final chance.
Maybe the final hour.
Dead flowers of the forgotten ones
on the highway of tears.
Stand with your sisters.
What happened to our sisters?
Stand with your mothers.
What happened to our mothers?
Stand with your daughters.
What happened to our daughters?
Stand up for the missing and murdered.
Are they missing or murdered?
A vast group of Native women, my sisters, my mothers, my daughters, You'll never be forgotten.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. That's Stardale's girls group that's in Calgary, and they just received some funding to do some more work. And that work that they have done has been really, really good and really profound, because it looks at the land. And when we talk about having heard our speaker talk, Jamie, talk about the abuse and violence towards women, we equate that to the violence and abuse towards Makoche, Mother Earth. And so when you see the parallels of industry or a different belief system, then you begin to understand better how abuse is normalized to women and girls, Indigenous women and girls, because it's normalized to Mother Earth. And we see that within climate change, within industry. We don't have within the community, some of the trauma and some of the symptoms of that are substance abuse, addiction, with dealers in communities or people going to communities to deal and sharing these things that are unhealthy and take away our spirit. But also too, when you look at industry within climate change and Mother Earth, industry can be seen as the dealer, because what they're doing is dismantling the earth. And that to us as Indigenous people is very harmful, because we have traditional ways, we have customs and ceremonies that are tied in with the earth, specifically with life givers and life ceremonies that we do after we give life. Even within giving life, we risk death to give life. And so within Indigenous women teachings, there are certain ceremonies that we do that are tied into the earth. And when we don't have an area to go to or to travel to anymore due to industry or climate change, it's really impacts where we're at today. And so the girls here, what's shown is a vision forward and how they're working and using drumming as a way to reclaim their heritage and reclaim their steps into who they are and their identity and their belonging, because within an urban setting, there isn't a lot of cultural resources that will fit each of their needs. There's many different nations that live within an urban setting. And so for these girls to come together and create the video and the work that they have is really amazing to see that. Also too, just to recap on Jamie sharing with the skirts, making the skirts, those are medicine skirts. We carry our medicine in how we walk and carry ourselves in that color. She talked about the red being our blood memory or DNA. It's very specific to us and how we walk upon Mother Earth. So again, tied into the land, there was always that connection between life givers and the land. And when we started to do this, we did this in Morley last year, and we made 17 skirts that we gave to families in here, and then in Sutina as well, to 16, I believe. And so just that little ripple effect, but still that effect of being able for those communities to have the ribbon skirts walked upon their land and start that reclamation of identity and belonging. And so with that, I think we'll go to questions if there's any questions. And then Shannon, if you had anything else, you want to do the questions and then go into your part? Does that work?
Yeah, let's do the questions first.
Okay.
And so I have seen one or two questions in the chat. This would be the time now, folks, if you have other questions, to add them to the chat. I'm going to take a little moderator's advantage here and see if I can put in a first question. Teresa mentioned some of how the Sisters in Spirit work is connected to ecological justice or climate justice. And Jamie, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, about how your experiences or the work that you do is related to relationships with the land or in the water or anything of that sort. Do you want to add anything to what Teresa was saying?
Thank you. I'm not sure I understand the question.
I heard Teresa saying something that I have heard before, that there is a parallel and when the earth is raped, that's when women are also raped and vice versa, and that there's a connection there between the lack of respect for women and the lack of respect for Mother Earth. Do you see that connection? Does that ring true for you?
100% it does. I'm always teaching my children and, you know, my siblings' children and their children always that the earth is our mother, that they have to respect the earth because she gives life just like I gave life, or just like their mom or their auntie, you know, like they gave life. And even like littering. Once they were driving and one of them throws something out of the vehicle, I'll tell them that, would you throw garbage at me? To help them to understand the important role Mother Earth is to all of us. She's the giver of all life. And I completely agree with what Teresa says. And it's sad, you know, my brother, Bob, we were driving through Muscatcheese. This was in the 80s. And I told him, those oil wells, they look like little mosquitoes. And then he said they're worse than mosquitoes. That oil that they're sucking out of Mother Earth is her blood. They're draining her of her blood. And yet they expect her to continue to provide for them when they're, you know, bleeding her dry. All these trees, that's her breath she's giving us, you know, and they're cutting them all down. Yet they expect her to provide for them. They're poisoning the waters. Like there's just so much. Like that should be one whole webinar right there. But I completely agree. I try to teach any children within my proximity, if I see them, you know, doing things like especially picking medicines, there are certain ways you do it, and it angers me when I see all over social media people are doing, you know, they're harvesting commercially for, you know, monetary gain. It hurts. It really hurts to know that Mother Earth is being raped like that and for profit. And I agree with the analogy that she said. They are like, you know, the industry is like the dealers. All these people, you know, logging, digging for oil, harvesting our medicines. They're all like dealers that have no regard or respect for Mother Earth at all.
Thank you, Jamie. We do agree, and we appreciate how you can highlight that for us and help us to understand. There was a question in the chat earlier while you were sharing a bit about your story that came from Tina. Jamie, as you moved forward in your journey, what resources for like educational, mental health, financial, did you receive? Or were there any resources lacking due to how people regarded the Indigenous women in community? Were the women afraid to get support for fear of repercussions of further abuse? So there's a few questions in there.
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question.
You pick out what you want to share.
So one of the things that I seen or that I experienced personally, that I've seen with other women, not just here, but in my home community, when they reach out for the resources that are available and they have children, there is always some kind of, I guess, insertion of child welfare or that threat of child welfare if you go and admit I'm struggling with drinking, or then they open a file immediately. Oh, you have substance abuse problems and you're an unfit parent, or they open an investigative file and they come and do a home visit. So that's one downfall. Yeah, there are some resources in place, but at what cost? Like if you go and reach out and say you're struggling with drug addiction, you have, there's a huge risk and a very real reality that they will just come and take your kids, that they will just deem you unfit and they will take your kids. So the resources here in Vancouver and also back home, again, the criteria, it's kind of like set to put barriers in front of you, I guess. Like back home, you have to be clean and sober for 2 weeks if you want to get into a detox. And if you've tried to get into a detox, I know firsthand experience, you have to be in active use to be able to get into a detox center. But back home, you have to be clean and sober for 2 weeks before they'll accept you to go into detox, which would open your door to get into a treatment center. So say you manage to follow through each of these hoops that they put in front of you. When you get home, there's no support in place, like aftercare support. You're returned back to the same toxic environment. You're returned back to the same community that has, dealers in every other house, that have people that are in active use. There's no safe space for you to go when you're done. And then on our reserve back home, there's no real safe space for you to go when you want to leave. Financially, there's no resources. There's none here. I don't know of any that are there. If you're on income assistance, you get cut off of your income assistance while you're in treatment, except for I think it's $90 for your personal incidentals. That's it. So they kind of make it harder for you to take any steps forward. But I'm living proof that if you want that, you'll find ways to make it work. Now, here, one of the problems, which is why we created this not-for-profit called Sweetgrass Sisters Healing Society, is in order to get some of the resources here within the city, within this urban environment, you need to give up your band number, like give them your band number, your nation. You have to have a current address, a valid email, and a valid cell phone number. And living here, the majority of the people that need help, they're couch surfing. They don't have a fixed address. A lot of them are 60 scoopers or have aged out of care. So they don't even know what nation they're from, much less their band number. So they can't access that. A lot of them are barely getting by. So they don't have money to buy minutes for their phone, and they don't have a computer. So how would they keep a valid email address? So there's, again, barriers that are there that they need to overcome. How are you supposed to overcome that when you don't, you're couch surfing, or if not, you're living literally on the street? There's no way to get an email address, anything. If you're living on the street, if you're at that stage, anything that you have, you're at risk of getting it stolen every day. So if you had a phone and you did get a valid number, chances are it'll get stolen from you, within a week or two. So yeah, the resources, like I said earlier in my presentation, the Indigenous organizations, there's a lot of red tape, and there's a lot of politics. Like grassroots people, they suffer a lot. They're used to accepting that this is life. They don't know, they've never known anything else. So we just accept whatever comes our way, and we find our ways to survive through it. Thankfully, I'm getting myself out of survival mode, and I'm actually at a place of action now. And I try to share that with as many people as I can to help, wake them up and let them know that they don't need to settle for that they're worth more than that we're all worth more than that. And especially the women, they're so used to getting treated so horribly wrong, and even by other women, you know, that violence, that abuse is there, and you know, has a strong presence from other women. I think that they're just so beaten down that they don't like, they can't handle to see a woman rise. And that's not their fault. We were groomed to believe that, just like how this country was groomed to believe that we're less than, you know, the average citizen. I think there could be some improvements and the resources that are there, but how do we get there?
Yes, exactly. How do we get there? Speaking of improvements and a hope for improvements, someone asked in the chat about most of the action orders of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have not been fulfilled yet. Do you have any of those recommendations that are, or those calls to action, which are particularly important to you or stand out to you, thinking about the 94 calls to action? Do any of those stick out to you? And if that doesn't grab you, or you don't want to comment on that one, there was one more that I thought I would share before we have to wrap it up tonight. Jamie or Teresa, did you want to respond to that one?
I think, well, with that, there's a lot within the calls to action that needs to be implemented, but first, before we step forward, and then we need to hear the truth first. So having sessions like this with people like Jamie, who are activists and doing the work, and also having that lived experience, and then the calls to action are recommendations, and when are they going to become action? Because we've seen the inquiry reclaiming power in place when it was put in, and not a lot of it being implemented yet. And we did this before with they did this before with the Highway of Tears, Highway 16 in BC, and one of the recommendations was to create better bus routes, more frequent routes, more buses. And where are we now? Years later, the buses stopped. So it's just an inquiry to go and spend money to do research and do all these things and lip service, but nothing's put in place. And that's where we find, where do we have that ethical space of these things being talked about and these ideas and philosophies and recommendations, but nothing is being done. So then it falls upon people like Jamie and myself who do these things. And if we aren't talking out about the injustices done, just not only to the woman, but the land too, because from the land, we get the ceremonies, we get the plants, the herbs that we need for our rites of passage, for our cleansing ceremonies, for things that deal with trauma and abuse. And if we cannot get those plants and herbs because of parks, because we can't go into parks and get those traditional areas, those herbs and medicines, or if it's like nearby here, we have a plant, a cement plant, and they don't hunt, our men don't hunt near there because of the acid or the acidic dust that has come out from the cement plant. So we know not to hunt there or to fish there because of what that does to the Mother Earth. It'll in turn do to us. And if we don't feel safe going into a park or into an area to harvest and get sweetgrass and sage because we have fear of becoming a MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous person, how can we say things are going in the right way? So if that's a fear that we have every day, to make sure that we have our family with us or that they know, and that's a reality for us as Indigenous women, we have to take so many safety precautions just to go to the store, to go check the mail, or if you don't hear from me, or if I don't text back, that's an ongoing reality for us. And so those, I think, as much as I can say right now before we have to wrap it up. So Jamie, if you wanted to quickly add, or
the calls to action, that really angers me, because there was a lot of money that was put out there, and when all of that was taking place here, when the organizations or some people from the organizations here participated in that, a lot of it was performative. A lot of it was not genuine, and you could see it. Like still to this day, like everything that I do, I go and knock on doors, I email people. I don't have dollars coming in. I fundraise. look for donations, but there was money this past year, the past 2 years actually, that was, given to the city for, things like this. And it's the same people that get it, the performative ones. And they don't do anything. They literally don't do anything but use it as a platform to further their own agendas. There's nothing like, you don't see these people out there on the street putting up posters. You don't see these people at rallies. You see them on social media. You see them, when they're bragging about they got this funding or whatever, but they're not actually there at the grassroots trying to help our women, trying to help our people. And so it really makes me angry. There's a lot of those calls to action that I feel very, very strongly about, but how do you get there? There's just so much bureaucracy.
So
It's
much.
just crazy.
So much change needed. Jamie, there have been a number of asks in the chat about both petitions and fundraising. And if you have any calls that you want to share with the group, calls to action in terms of fundraising, in terms of petitions, please feel free to share them in the chat or to share them with us later if that we can email to people. And there are people here who would like to support. And I think, Teresa, we're going to just go a little bit over because you had offered to say a word about water. So let's make that the final question.
Okay. So, and within these things, we have to understand the intricacy and the intricacy, but also the complexity of understanding worldviews and Indigenous perspective. And so we see things in a realm of four, so spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental. And within that, looking at the water, like how I just talked about earlier, we do a land acknowledgement, but we don't talk about a water acknowledgement. And we all need water to live. But also too, we have water ceremonies that we do. And if we cannot do those water ceremonies for our people, for our individuals in the time of need, then how are we passing on truth? How are we passing on a livelihood to people? And so these things need to be identified, and the awareness needs to be brought forth and shared. And even there are sacred areas that we would go for water for healing within these mountains. And they've been commercialized. They've been made into a business now for people to get money off them, if it's the hot springs or different areas like that, where it's being used in such a way to overuse of it. And we would have been mindful of that, of who would go at what time and in that area, because we have to be careful of our energy in that area. So within the water, there are water ceremonies that are done that are just water with the water ceremonies, but then within ceremony, there is ceremonies that include water. And so that's very important, because when we look at climate change and the effects to land or to Mother Earth, what is being done that is taking from her. And when we take from her, how are we filling that back? If we're filling it with a monetary means, that monetary means is not filling that in that emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual aspect. It does not fill that. And so we have to look at what we're taking away is actually twice as much as what we're going to be able to put back. And
so much wisdom. I really want to thank you both, Jamie and Teresa, for all the wisdom you have shared. And so folks, if we were in the room together, we would applaud. And I would invite you to raise your hands or to use your reactions button. We raise them to you, Teresa and Jamie. We're so grateful for your presence and for your willingness to share your stories and your wisdom. And we look forward to staying in contact. And folks, as you remember these stories, as you reflect on them, you may want to gather with others again to pray together and to be in a spiritual place and with other folks. And so we invite you for Thursday evening for the prayer times. And remember, you can save this chat, so you can just scroll up a little bit there and find the link to register and join for that on Thursday evening at the same time. Please do share the remaining webinars with friends and networks. Those links have been in the chat as well. I want to also encourage you to widen the circle. There are many ways that you can bring your friends, your communities, perhaps your church community into the conversation. And so if you need a little help to do that, a few suggestions, you might consider looking at the Faithful Climate Conversations. These are meant for small group conversations, 6, 8, 10 people. And they're a guided 2-hour conversations about climate change and about what we can do together about climate change, starting from our faith and thinking about how climate justice is part of what we feel called to out of our faith. And so I want to, we also have a couple of other things to highlight. I'm going to try to do this really quickly. As I mentioned at the beginning, there is a delegation. There are 7 global partners and 4 folks from within what we call Canada. 3 of those folks are Indigenous. So Jamie, when you said, I wish our voices would be there, we think that is also really important. And there are 3 Indigenous folks going as part of this delegation. 2 of them are women. And we invite you all to support them and to be part of the process of bringing them along to COP27. And so there was going to be a gathering of folks who really want to help follow what they're doing and spreading what they're doing. So writing or sharing or social media. And that's we call that an animators circle. We're going to have a meeting at the end of this month to talk about what that means and how we're going to do it and how we can support each other in doing it. So a meeting before COP starts, before the United Nations gathering starts. And so if you're interested in that, if you're interested in gathering with other people to talk about how we as Canadians can get the most out of these United Nations meetings, how we can have our voice into that, how we can support the delegation, come on the 26th and we'll talk about what we can do together. And then just before it starts, just before the delegates actually travel, on November 3rd, we will be having a live conversation with the 11 delegates. And so watch for more information about that. Keep that day open. We're not exactly sure whose time zone will be preferenced in that. We'll tell you the details soon and look forward to that opportunity. So with that, I want to just thank you once again, Jamie and Teresa, for your sharing, and thank you all for your participation here tonight. We look forward to seeing you again next week.